Welcome to this lesson, my dear boys and girls. I warmly welcome you to this lesson. I'm here to take you through lesson 21 as per the math lesson. But before you look at lesson 21, I want to make some review of the previous lesson that was taught by my colleague. Remember in that lesson, my colleague taught you about, you looked at finding the number of revolutions. And you stated the formula of finding number of revolutions being number of revolutions equals distance divided by circumference. We want to use the knowledge that the previous teacher taught you to look at more about revolutions. Basing on what the previous teacher taught you, here we are. We want to look at this lesson, which is more about revolution. More about revolution, we shall look at example 1. A bicycle wheel can cover a distance of 440 decimeters in 5 revolutions. Find the circumference of the wheel. In this question, they want us to find the circumference of the wheel. But using the knowledge from the previous lesson, we need to identify the following. In this question, we are given the distance which is 440 decimeters that this bicycle had covered, making 5 revolutions. We have the distance and we have the number of revolutions. Remember, in the previous lesson, you looked at number of revolutions being equal to distance out of circumference. So we are going to use the very formula. We are going to look at the knowledge that the teacher taught to work out this. Remember, as we look at circumference, there are 2 ways of looking for circumference. We can use the formula. At the same time, we can use the proportions in this work. Now, looking at circumference, we shall say, borrowing knowledge from what the teacher taught, we shall say circumference is equal to distance divided by number of revolutions. Circumference is equal to the distance divided by the number of revolution. So now our next step in this, we shall have to substitute for circumference. Remember, our distance in this question is 440 decimeters. We shall divide by the number of revolutions, which is 5. So at that stage, we shall divide by 5. 5 into 5, we come up with a 1. 440 divided by 5, we shall come up with 88. So what does it mean? That our circumference is equal to 88 decimeters. 88 decimeters, that is our circumference as per this question. This is one way of looking for circumference, using the knowledge the previous teacher taught you. Using the formula he taught you, we've used that formula to look for circumference. Remember, the formula was talking about 3 major aspects. We talked about the distance, the revolutions, and also the circumference. So out of that formula, we've managed to derive the formula of calculating circumference being distance out of number of revolutions. This is one way of working out revolution. But however, you can still look for revolution in another way. How do we get revolution? We can still get revolution from this question using the idea of proportions. And how do we do it? We shall go back to the question, and according to the question, 5 revolutions. 5 revolutions cover a distance of 440 decimeters. So our target is to look at 1 revolution. How about 1 revolution? 1 revolution covers, it will cover 1 out of 5 times 440 decimeters. Where does 1 out of 5 come from? Remember, 5 revolutions cover 440 decimeters. Now, 1 revolution will cover 1 out of 5. In other words, in most cases, you say new out of old. New out of old, so times the 440 decimeters. Still looking at 1 revolution. 1 revolution covers, we shall have 1 out of 5 times 440. And at this stage, we shall carry out the cancelling. So at this stage, my dear learners, we shall divide 5 divided by 5, which will give us a 1. Then we shall also divide 440 giving us 88. So what does it mean? That in one revolution covers 88 decimeters. But remember in the previous lesson, the teacher emphasized an important aspect, which was one revolution. One revolution is the same as circumference. So we shall look at that concept, that one revolution is equal to circumference. Finally, we shall conclude that our circumference is 88 decimeters, as per the question, as that is the answer for that question. Now, my dear boys and girls, there is a lot you need to look at as per this number. When we talk about looking for circumference, circumference can be found in two ways. You can either use the formula or you can use the proportions. And we need that knowledge in the next examples we are going to look at. Now let us look at the next number. The next number, part B of number 1 says, calculate the diameter of the wheel. Calculate the diameter of the wheel. Remember, in part A, we've managed to get the circumference. Of course, borrowing a leaflet from what you were taught previously, we can look for the diameter using the formula that pi d is equal to circumference. Pi d is equal to circumference. I believe, my dear boys and girls, you can still recall that. So at this stage, we shall substitute our pi as 22 times the diameter being equal to our circumference. The circumference we've got in part 1, which is 88 decimeters. So we shall continue to say 22 out of 7 times diameter is equal to 88 decimeters. Of course, we shall multiply on both sides by 7. So we shall have 7 times 22 out of 7 decimeters. This is equal to 88 decimeters times 7. Next step, we shall cancel 7 divided by 7, we come up with a 1. 7 divided by 7, we come up with a 1. Let me hope you all follow me. So in our next step, we shall have 22 decimeters. 22 decimeters is equal to 88 decimeters times 7. 88 decimeters times 7. So from that step, we shall have to divide on both sides by 22. Even on this other side, we shall divide by 22. We shall put out of 22. So my dear boys and girls, the task is we are going to cancel by 22. 22 divided by 22, we come up with a 1. 22 divided by 22, we shall come up with a 1. So now we shall also come at this stage, we divide by 22. 22 divided by 22, we still come up with a 1. No. 22, this time divide by 2, we shall come up with 11. Then 88 divided by 2, we shall come up with 44. Now the next target is to divide. When you look at 44 and 11, these are multiples of 11. We can reduce by 11. 11 into 11, we come up with a 1. 44 divided by 11, we shall come up with a 4. So what does it mean? That our diameter will equal to 4 decimeters times 7. Therefore, our diameter will equal to 28 centimeters. We shall finally underline that as our diameter. So that is example 1. In example 1, we've managed to look for circumference. Remember circumference, we used the formula. The next one, we're looking for circumference, we used the proportions. And finally, we managed to calculate the diameter using pi d equals circumference. So now, my dear boys and girls, we need to look at the next number. The next number says the distance between town P and town Q is 352 meters. Calculate the radius of a tire that covers it in 400 tons in centimeters. The distance between, not town, but point. The distance between point P and point Q is 352 meters. Calculate the radius of a tire that covers it in 400 tons in centimeters. Now when you look at this question is a bit technical. We are given 2 points, point P and point Q. The distance in between is 352 meters. And in this very question, this distance, they want us to calculate the radius of the tire that covers it in 400 tons, and the radius should be given in centimeters. There is need to change the units. Remember the distance was given in meters. We need to convert this distance into centimeters in order for us to look for the radius in centimeters. So how do we go about this? Remember, you looked at conversion of units right from primary 4, and you can still remember what your teachers taught you, that 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. And according to this question, the distance is 352 meters. We need to change the 352 meters into centimeters. We shall have our 352 meters being equal to 352 times 100 centimeters. So what does it mean? We can carry out this multiplication directly. So 352 meters is equal to 35,200 centimeters. Now, having changed the distance into centimeters, our next target is to look for the circumference. But my dear boys, according to how we looked for the circumference in the first example, I gave you 2 ways. You can either use the formula or you can use the proportions. But still, in this number, I need to re-emphasize it. We shall look at the 2 ways of looking for circumference. Now, circumference, using proportions, using the idea of proportions, we shall look at the 400 tons. The 400 tons cover 35,200 centimeters. 35,400 centimeters as the coverage for the 400 tons. Now, how about 1 ton? 1 ton covers 1 out of 400 times 35,200 centimeters. Let me hope you all following. So at this stage, we shall cancel the zeros, those 2 zeros. We shall cancel with those 2 zeros. Our next step is to look at, we are going to divide using 4. Because 4 is a common factor. So we shall cancel 4 divided by 4. We shall come up with the 1. 352 divided by 4. My dear boys, I believe the answer is 88. 88 when you divide 354 by 4. So what does it mean? That circumference will equal to 88 centimeters. Remember, in example 1, it was clearly written that 1 revolution, in other words, 1 turn, is equal to circumference. Therefore, this 1 turn is being reflected by the circumference, which is 88 centimeters. This is looking for circumference using proportions. But remember, in the question, they want us to calculate the radius of the tire. Borrowing knowledge from the previous lessons we've looked at, we shall try our level best to look for the radius. And how do we get the radius of the tire? We shall look at radius as being 2 pi r is equal to circumference. 2 pi r is equal to circumference. We've managed to get the circumference as 88 centimeters. Our next step is to substitute. My dear boys and girls, you're going to substitute in order for us to look for the circumference. So, we shall have 2 times 22 out of 7 times the radius. This is equal to 88 centimeters. In our next step, we shall multiply 2 times 22. We shall come up with 44. But out of 7, this is out of 7 times the radius. This is equal to 88 centimeters. We shall proceed. In the next step, we shall multiply 7, this denominator here, on both sides. We shall have 7 times 44 out of 7 times the radius. This is equal to 88 centimeters times 7. So at this very stage, we shall cancel 7 divided by 7, we shall come up with a 1. 7 divided by 7, we shall come up with a 1. So my dear boys and girls, we shall now multiply 44 times r, which is 44r, being equal to 88 centimeters times 7 centimeters. In the next step, we are going to divide 44 on both sides. So whereby we shall have 44, r being equal to 88 centimeters times 7. We shall say, my dear boys and girls, we shall say out of 44, also here out of 44. So at this stage, we shall cancel by 44, we shall come up with the 1. 44 divided by 44, we shall come up with the 1, even at that stage. So we shall divide 88 divided by 44, we shall come up with the 2. So what does it mean? That our radius is equal to 2 centimeters. 2 centimeters times 7. 2 centimeters times 7. So finally our radius will equal to 14 centimeters. We shall underline that as our final answer as per that number. My dear boys and girls, this question required you to calculate the circumference. It required you to calculate the radius. Question 1, part B, required you to calculate the diameter. So when calculating the radius given circumference, our formula stands to be 2 pi r equals circumference. So this is the solution as per example 2, but we shall still look at example 2, the very example, but this time using the formula for calculating circumference. In the first instance, we used proportions, but in this situation, we want to look at using the formula for calculating circumference. So now, looking at the very question, I believe you can read with me. The distance between point P and point Q is 352 meters. Calculate the radius of the tire that covers it in 400 tons, in centimeters. Now, this is also another way of approaching this number. Remember, we need to look for the radius in centimeters. But the distance between the 2 points has been given in meters. So what we have to do, my dear boys and girls, is to first convert our distance, that is the distance between P and Q, in centimeters. Whereby, as we can look at this, make a review, 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. And in the question we have 352 meters. With 352 meters, my dear boys and girls, will equal to 352 times 100 centimeters. Mathematically, 352 meters is equal to 35,200 centimeters. Now, having got the distance between point P and Q in centimeters, our next target is to look for the circumference. But remember, who of you can recall how we calculate circumference given the distance and the number of turns? How do we calculate circumference, my dear boys and girls? Yes, we shall find out that circumference is equal to distance out of number of revolution. The number of revolutions. It will be the distance covered out of the number of revolutions. The next step, we shall carry out the substitution. And as we substitute, our circumference will equal to the distance, which distance is already in centimeters. Why is it in centimeters? It's because our final answer, the radius, should be calculated in centimeters. Our circumference will equal to 35,200 centimeters out of 400. At this very stage, we shall cancel that 2 zeros down, and we shall also cancel the 2 zeros up. Now, my dear boys and girls, we looked at divisibility test for 4, and we know when is a number divisible by 4. Who can recall that? A number is divisible by 4 if the last 2 digits are divisible by 4. Looking at the multiples of 4, we know very well that 52 is exactly divisible by 4 because it is a multiple of 4. So we shall go direct and reduce by 4. We shall cancel by 4. We shall come up with a 1. 352, my dear boys. What is the outcome when we divide 352 by 4? Yes, we shall come up with 88. And I know you've exactly got that. So our circumference is going to equal to 88 centimeters. This is the same as using proportions. If you can recall very well, when we use the proportions, you still come up with the circumference being as 88 centimeters. My dear boys and girls, having got the circumference, what do they exactly want us to find? They want us to find the radius of the tire. Now, how do we get to the radius of the tire? Yes, you can remind us how do we get to the radius given circumference? Yes, good. The radius of the tire, we shall use the formula that 2 pi r is equal to circumference. Our next step, we shall carry out the substitution as 2 times 22, 22 out of 7 standing for pi, times the radius which we don't know. This is equal to 88 centimeters. In the next step, we shall multiply the 22 times 2, and we shall come up with the 44. But out of 7 times the radius, this is equal to 88 centimeters. Now, from that stage, we shall move on to the next step. We shall multiply 7 on both sides. We shall eliminate this denominator by multiplying it on both sides. At this very stage, my dear boys and girls, if you can recall so well, we shall have to cancel 7 divided by 7, everyone. What shall we come up with? Good, we shall come up with a 1. Yes, 7 divided by 7, sorry, it is 7 divided by 7. What shall we come up with, everyone? Good, we shall come up with a 1. So we shall proceed and say that 44r is equal to 88 centimeters times 7. Let me hope we are all at that point. Yes, what is our next step, my dear boys and girls? What shall we have as our next step? Yes, our next step, we shall go in for division. What are we going to divide? That is 44. We shall divide 44 on both sides. So here we go. 44 divided by 44. Boys and girls, what do we come up with? Good. We come up with a 1. Yes, my dear boys and girls, 44 into 44. Yes, we shall still come up with a 1. Now, looking at this other side, we want to divide 88 centimeters times 7, but out of 44. So we shall still cancel 44 divided by 44. We shall come up with a 1. 88, boys and girls, when divided by 44, what do we come up with? Yes, we shall come up with a 2. So what does it mean? Our radius is equal to these 2 centimeters times the 7. So finally, our radius will equal to 40 to 14 centimeters, and we shall underline that answer. Now, my dear boys and girls, as you look at example 2, looking at the distance between the 2 towns, looking at the distance given between the 2 towns, which was 352 meters, what you were required to look for the radius of the tire that made the 400 revolutions. But remember, this is very important. One can calculate the circumference using the formula, which formula is, everyone, the formula is circumference equals distance out of number of revolutions. You can use that idea to look for circumference. If not, you can use the knowledge of the use of proportions. You can still get a circumference. That is the logic behind this question. One can use the first approach of using proportions. Another learner can use the second approach of using the formula. So that is all about example 1. Example 2 required you to look for radius. And example 1 required you to look for diameter. That was in part B. So you should master, when asked for radius given circumference, the formula is 2 pi r equals circumference. When you're looking for diameter given circumference, the formula is pi d equals circumference. Those are very important aspects you need to put into your brains, because at any one time t, you'll need to apply them. So we need to look at our last example, that is example 3, which states, we can read together. We can read together as a team. Peter drives a distance of 88 kilometers from town A to town B, making 40,000 revolutions. Find the diameter of the wheel in centimeters. We can read for the second time. Peter drives a distance of 88 kilometers from town A to town B, making 40,000 revolutions. Find the diameter of the wheel in centimeters. The diameter of the wheel in centimeters. My dear boys and girls, as you look at example 3, the distance between town A and town B has been given as 88 kilometers. And the revolutions that were made, they were 40,000. And the question requires you to look for the diameter of the wheel in centimeters. Now, my dear boys and girls, if you can recall so well, in example 2, where there was need for us to convert the units into centimeters, here is another task of converting the 88 kilometers into centimeters. So how do you go about this? We shall still borrow the knowledge our teachers taught us in primary 5, primary 6. You even looked at this in primary 4. Changing from one unit to another unit. We shall still use the same knowledge to convert this distance into centimeters. The moment we convert this distance into centimeters, we shall be in a position to look for the circumference. Which circumference will guide us to look for the diameter, which is required in centimeters. Now, my dear boys and girls, we need to start off to convert the distance between town A and town B into centimeters. Remember, who can remind us? What does 1 kilometer equal to into centimeters? Yes, 1 kilometer is equal to 100,000 centimeters. I believe you all know this and you know where it has come from. Because you looked at this in primary 5, you looked at it in primary 6, and right now you're looking at it in primary 7. So this is not all that, it's not all that new to you. So now, having known that 1 kilometer is equal to 100,000 centimeters, our task is to convert the 88 kilometers. So now, my dear boys and girls, we shall have 88 kilometers being equal to 88 times 100,000 centimeters. Finally, our 88 kilometers in terms of centimeters will equal to 8,800,000 centimeters. This is the distance between town A and town B, but in centimeters. We've converted this distance into centimeters because the diameter is required to be calculated in centimeters. That is the reason as to why we are converting the 88 kilometers into centimeters. Now, my dear boys and girls, if you can recall, we had two ways of calculating circumference. Who can remind us of the first way? Yes, what is it? That is it, using proportions. Using proportions. And how do we use the proportions? It makes 40,000 revolutions. It makes, this wheel makes 40,000 revolutions. 40,000 revolutions after covering a distance of 88 kilometers. So we shall say 40,000 revolutions cover. Instead of 88 kilometers, we shall insert it in terms of centimeters. 40,000 revolutions cover 8,800,000 centimeters. 40,000 revolutions cover 8,800,000 centimeters. But my dear boys and girls, our focus is to look at the coverage of one revolution. And what will it state? One revolution. Remember, one revolution is equal to circumference. That is the focus. That's why we are looking for one revolution. One revolution covers, it will be the one out of the 40,000 times 8,800,000 centimeters. So my dear boys and girls, we shall move on to the next step. And we shall, this step here, it is a step for us to carry out the reducing, the cancelling, the division. So how do we carry out the division? We shall cancel these 4 zeros by these other 4 zeros. So we shall remain with 1 out of 4 times 880, but centimeters. So my dear boys and girls, looking at the multiples of 4, divisibility test for 4, we know a number is divisible by 4 if the last 2 digits are a multiple 4. So we shall divide by 4 here. What do we come up with, boys and girls? 1. 880 divided by 4, we shall come up with 220. So what does it mean? Our circumference is equal to 220 meters. Now, having got the circumference, the question wants us to look for the diameter. Boys and girls, I believe you know. How do we get diameter? Yes, good. Diameter is equal to, pi d is equal to circumference. Pi d is equal to circumference. Our next step, we shall substitute. Our pi is 22 out of 7. Times the diameter. This is equal to 220. So in the next step, we shall eliminate the 7 by multiplying it on both sides. After multiplying 7 on both sides, we shall cancel by 7. Boys and girls, we come up with a 1. By 7, my dear boys and girls, we shall come up with a 1. So what does it mean? We shall have the 22D equals 220 centimeters times 7. But at this very stage, we shall divide on both sides by 22. Why do we divide by 22? It's because we want to come up with the value of D, which D is representing our diameter. So by 22, everyone, good, we come up with a 1. 22 divided by 22, we come up with a 1. 22 into 22 on this other side, we shall come up with a 1. So we shall come up with a 1. So 220 centimeters divided by 22, we shall come up with 10. So my dear boys and girls, we shall have our diameter be equal to 10 centimeters times 7. Finally, our diameter will equal to 70 centimeters. And we shall have to underline that. Let me hope we are all moving at the same pace. This work is so interesting as long as you master the concepts and how to do it. So finally, we need to look at the very number. The very number, because we know there are many ways of killing a rat. There are many ways of getting answers in mathematics. As long as the steps are clearly stipulated and clearly written, that is it, you still come up with the same answer. Now, looking at Peter driving the distance of 88 kilometers from town A to town B, making 40,000 revolutions, And the question says, find the diameter of the wheel in centimeters. Still, we shall convert the distance, the 88 kilometers, into centimeters, whereby 1 kilometer is equal to 100,000 centimeters. We shall change the 88 kilometers into centimeters, which will equal to 88 times 100,000 centimeters. 100,000 centimeters. Finally giving us our distance as 8,800,000 centimeters. Now, having got the distance, remember, circumference can also be found as distance out of number of revolutions, which is very interesting. If you cannot use the proportions, you can use this formula. This formula is so interesting because it reminds you a lot about what the teacher taught in the previous lesson. Our next step is to carry out substitution. Our circumference will equal to the distance, which is 8,800,000 centimeters out of 40,000. At this very step, we shall cancel the 4 zeros down. We shall also cancel the 4 zeros up. So we shall go direct by 4. Everybody, what do we come up with? Good, we come up with the 1. How about 880 divided by 4? What do we come up with? Good, you're such a wonderful class. So circumference is equal to 220 centimeters. Now, having got the circumference using the formula, the question requires us to look for the diameter, but in centimeters. My dear boys and girls, who can remind us of the formula? Yes, good. Someone has said pi d equals circumference, which is excellent. Next step, what do we do, boys and girls? Good. Someone is telling me that we should carry out the substitution. Now, having substituted pi as 22 times diameter being equal to 220 centimeters, our next step is to multiply 7 on both sides. My dear boys and girls, what is 7 divided by 7? Good. Somebody is telling me 1. How about 7 divided by 7? Good. Somebody is telling me the answer is 1. Now, we shall have 22d, which is 22 times diameter, is equal to 220 centimeters times 7. We shall move on to divide by 22 on both sides. I believe, boys and girls, you all following. We shall divide by 22. Even on this other side, we shall divide by 22. Yes. What is 22 divided by 22? Good. The outcome is a 1. 22 divided by 22. The outcome is a 1. Now, my dear boys and girls, we shall still divide by 22 here. We come up with a 1. Finally, what is 220 divided by 22? May I know the answer from you? Good. Somebody has whispered that the answer is 10. That when you divide 220 by 22, you come up with a 10. You come up with 10. So diameter is equal to 10 centimeters times 7. Finally, our diameter becomes 70 centimeters. Obviously, we shall underline the answer. My dear boys and girls, I want to thank you so much for being such a wonderful class, for being good listeners. May God richly bless you. Take care of yourselves. May God richly bless you. I remain Nakavra Anit, the only and only